You've probably heard of the Game Grumps, along with all the myriad of projects they've put out over the years. To announce my bias up front, I'm also a huge mega fan. I started watching right after Dan joined, and I've been watching ever since. I've been to a lot of the Tournament of Gamers shows, and I've gone to at least one show of every tour of NSP. I mean it when I say I adore these guys, and they've gotten me through some really tough times. But even saying all that, I do still think their books are worth checking out, even if you're not a Game Grump fan. And if you didn't know the Game Grumps came out with books, well, now you do. And I hope I can share a little bit of why I think they're so fun. Starting off with the NSP comic series published by Fantoons. The graphic novel duology, aka Volumes 1 and 2, follow the two band members of NSP, Dan Avedon / Danny Sexbang, and Brian Wecht / Ninja Brian. The story of the graphic novels really goes beyond the stage personas of Danny Sexbang and Ninja Brian to really look at Dan Avedon and Brian Wecht, to tell us who they are, where they came from, and how they came to be the people they are today. The first volume in the series follows Danny and Brian through their teens and their young adult years up to the point where the two of them first meet. We see both of them going through their coming-of-age journeys, dealing with friends, relationships, their dreams. A fun fact about the first volume is that it's actually split in two, and you flip it depending on which side of the story you want to read first. In Danny's section, we get a fun, cartoony art style and an equally upbeat story. It follows Danny specifically as it progresses through his childhood and teen years with his close-knit family. It also shows him slowly coming into his own as a musician and comedian, seeing some of his influences and how his friends and family really impacted the way that he approached comedy. We also get to see some of his struggles in his early 20s as he finds a bunch of stops and starts in his other bands before NSP. On the literal flip side, in Ninja Brian's section, we get a much more realistic art style and a much more grounded story to match that style. He briefly talks about the bullying he endured in his youth and his struggles to fit in while trying to figure himself out. We see how his family influenced his approach to life and stability, and we see him struggle to find that balance between music, comedy, science, and romance. There's also a fun section in Brian's half where his now wife Rachel narrates a part of it and talks about how they met, they fell in love, and eventually got married, and that part is really sweet and still very funny. The book ends when they literally meet in the middle, with Danny and Brian's first meeting being the culmination of both of their plotlines. And that's where the second volume picks up. Volume 2 of the series covers the early days of NSP, including how they juggled getting a band off the ground with day jobs and adult responsibilities. We see Brian specifically working as a theoretical physicist and becoming a father, and we learn more about Danny's drive and desire to follow his dreams at all costs, and we see some of the difficult steps that he takes to make it work. Danny's section also has a subplot about Aaron and Danny's friendship, how they met, how they came to be friends, and how Danny was eventually invited to be on the show. This duology was so fun to go through and to see a little bit of the origin story of people who are in a band that I really, really care about. Now, to be clear, do I think this series is probably a very rose-colored portrayal of their lives and musical journeys? Yeah. Is that a bad thing? No, not in my opinion. Both Danny and Brian are generally private people, as far as YouTubers go, and I think it's only fair that they share what they're comfortable sharing with the public. If you do end up picking this series up, don't expect a hard-hitting, tell-all memoir type of story. It's more of a retrospective jog through their memory lane. It's sweet, it's earnest, and the art style really reflects both the time periods and the personalities of Danny and Brian. If you are a fan of Game Grumps or NSP or just any of the people involved in the story, I really think you'll enjoy this. And if you just happen to like lighthearted graphic novels, I think this series is a good way to spend an afternoon. And next, the Ghost Hunters Adventure Club series. On the metaphorical flip side, you don't need to be a fan of Game Grumps or even be all that familiar with them to enjoy this duology. The books are in-universe allegedly written by Aaron Hansen's estranged uncle, Dr. Cecil H.H. Mills, a serious novelist who, falling upon hard times, has resorted to writing YA mystery novels. That's the framing device of the story, and the marketing if you ever saw that floating around. I'll admit, it's a bit of a strange framing device as far as in-universe meta-marketing goes, but the good news is you don't really need to have known what was going on to enjoy the books on their own. The series follows 3 plucky kids, JJ Watts, his maybe not brother Valentine Watts, and Trudy De La Rosa, as these wacky meddling kids solve mysteries. No actual ghosts, though, just your average standard murders and thievery. The series is a tongue-in-cheek, fourth-wall-breaking, loving pastiche of Scooby-Doo, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, all of those classic teen mystery solvers of the 80s and 90s. It knows the tropes, remembers them fondly, and knows how to play with them to mess with your expectations. In the first book, The Secret of the Grand Chateau, JJ and Valentine Watts are called up to the hotel, the Grand Chateau, to solve a mystery. They're called up by a strange, mysterious writer that's clearly meant to be a stand-in for Dr. Cecil H.H. Mills. Even though Dr. Cecil H.H. Mills is also a character in the story that he's writing, it gets very meta at times. Anyway, this mysterious elusive author recruits the two boys to solve a mystery and then perishes. Any more details would get into super spoiler territory, so I really recommend you check that out. The second book in the series, Express Train to Nowhere, has JJ, Valentine, and Trudy all going on an express train, ostensibly for a leadership summit, but then they get pulled into a mystery on the train, they run into someone mysterious from their past. There's a parody of political intrigue with two people from very small countries that seem to be more similar than they let on. Again, more details would equal spoilers, but I can tell you it's super fun, and at some points it does get very meta, even contemplating the relationship between authors and their characters and what they're owed to each other, which is a lot deeper than I thought I would ever get in a book made by the Game Grumps, but I think it handles it really well and it has a lot to say about the nature of writing. Speaking of characters, the characters in these stories are far more lovable than I expected. While they are meant to be pastiches of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, they're also characters in their own right, and they're really fun and engaging and developed and way more lovable than I thought going in. I actually still have a soft spot for Valentine Watts, who's the book-smart one of the group, and the voice of reason, but still very shy and awkward, easily frightened, and doing his best to overcome that because, well, his brother needs him. Overall, the Ghost Hunters Adventure Club series has solid writing, a world that feels lived in, and a lot more heart than I was expecting going in. And to this day, I will take any opportunity I can get to talk about the Ghost Hunters Adventure Club. And those are all the books that have been made by the Game Grumps. So far, anyway. I hope they do more. If not in either of these series, then in a new venture, because I really am excited to see where they can go in storytelling from here. I've really enjoyed all 4 of these books over the years, and if you haven't already, I really recommend that you check them out. If you have, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!